I signed an agreement with a local gym, but then was not able to go and submitted cancellation. But they're sending me a notice through creditors to pay them all the payment. What shall I do? So you've got basically potentially what's called a breach of contract. And then there is remedies in the event of a breach of contract, and then there is the sort of the enforcement of those remedies. So if I were to kind of categorize, let's start with the breach of contract. So when you sign an agreement, obviously you've signed a contract, and so presumably much depends in terms of what your obligations are and what the gym obligations are. Much depend on the terms of the contract. However, in many cases, I have to tell you, I haven't seen many good contracts drafted. So there are different legal ways to challenge a contract, or at least waiver, like, or amend certain terms of the contract. But since you haven't paid for the remainder of your fees, so the burden is not so much on you, the burden is on the gym. So the gym is the one who wants you to pay more, presumably for the breach of contract. So now what can they do in that case? So, again, depending on how the contract was drafted, in legal terms, they do have an argument that you've signed the contract, you've committed to the 1 year, and now you have breached the contract, you're not paying for the 1 year. And so they have a legal foundation, unless, again, there's the T's and C's apply, unless you have some other legitimate argument. But then the burden is on the company to do something about it. And what can they do? They can, in legal terms, what they have to do, they have to go to court. And when they have to go to court, they have to argue breach of contract. And as a result of breach of contract, we now want compensation for the breach. So obviously that takes money and time, but that's the proper way for any creditor to basically pursue a debtor. In this case, would be you, the debtor, and the creditor is the gym. But since it's a process and it costs money, but that is the proper way of doing it. What gyms do, and not just gyms but others, is that they appoint these creditors to go and chase. Now, that I have to tell you, in the UAE, that's not an industry that exists. So these creditors that can go and chase people for money. In some countries, they exist and they're licensed. In the UAE, there is no such license. So whoever it is that they claim to be creditors, they are not doing it legally. So they could be accountants, they could be consultants, but in terms of their licensing activity, there's no such activity that allows them to do it. So what these creditors are doing is not legal. So therefore, the best thing is, if you know that, don't worry about it. So you don't have to respond to the creditors because they have no legal authority, and there is no ability for them to enforce anything because they are legally not operating within the law. So you can ignore them. And with regards to the gym, basically, ultimately, you can just write to them that you are canceling a contract and leave it to them. So the burden becomes on them to file a court case and try to get compensation from you for the breach of contract. But I will tell you, in practical terms, it's not going to happen because it's too costly and it's just not worth it for the gym to pursue these kinds of cases in court.